It begins months earlier, with a young woman hunched over a cracked laptop in Nairobi, surrounded by relatives who pinned their hopes on her acceptance letter. She was not just leaving home, she was leaving the burden of being ordinary. Her name was Nia. She was 23, sharp-eyed, and ambitious enough to believe that medicine would be her bridge to a better life. The scholarship offer from a university in Eastern Europe felt like an answered prayer, the kind that people shouted about in church testimonies. For weeks, her neighbors called her Udaktari, doctor, even though she hadn't yet stepped foot in a hospital ward. When she finally boarded the plane, she carried a single suitcase. Inside, clothes neatly folded by her mother, a cheap stethoscope bought from a downtown pharmacy, and a small Bible pressed between them. Outside, the weight of her family's sacrifice, written in the lines on her father's face as he hugged her goodbye. The arrival city greeted her with cold air sharp enough to bite. The airport was metallic and sterile, the signs full of accents her tongue could not bend. She repeated her new mantra silently, just survive the first week. Just survive. Everything felt unfamiliar, the rushing crowds, the pale faces, the strange smell of bread and disinfectant. At the immigration desk, she presented her passport and acceptance letter. The officer skimmed through them with the bored expression of someone sifting through spam emails. His stamp hit the page lazily. She was inside. At first, things seemed to work. A student volunteer from the university, tall, smiling, wearing a red jacket with the school's emblem, met her at arrivals. He led her to a bus, gave her a map, and welcomed her to her new home. His kindness was a thin blanket against the cold, but it warmed her for a moment. The campus appeared grand in the brochure. In reality, it was grey concrete blocks from the 1970s, with peeling paint and narrow corridors that smelled of boiled cabbage. Still, Nia felt proud as she walked in. She imagined herself in a white coat, saving lives, sending money home, proving that she was worthy of the dreams placed upon her. But the first crack appeared the next morning. She woke early, rehearsed her introduction in the mirror. "Hello, I'm Nia, the new medical student from Kenya." Then walked to the faculty office. The secretary barely looked up.
"Name?"
the woman asked. "Nia Okoth. First-year medical program. I have a scholarship." The secretary frowned, typing slowly into her computer. A silence stretched. Finally, the woman spoke.
"There is no such name here."
Nia laughed nervously, sure it was just a system glitch. She pulled out her acceptance letter, official stamps and signatures glaring in blue ink. The secretary skimmed it and shrugged.
"This is not in the system,"
she said flatly.
"Please go to the international office."
At the international office, another computer screen, another frown, another shrug. No record. By the afternoon, Nia was pacing the campus corridors with a knot in her stomach. She retraced her steps, the email offer, the documents couriered, the congratulatory phone calls. She had not imagined it. Yet here, in the heart of the institution that supposedly invited her, she was invisible. The first student she spoke to gave her a sympathetic smile.
"Sometimes they make mistakes with Africans,"
he whispered. Mistakes. That word stung. Her phone buzzed with messages from home. "Have you started classes? Send us photos of your lecture hall. We are so proud of you." She could not bring herself to reply. That night, in her dorm room, she sat on the edge of the bed staring at the acceptance letter under the dim light. The paper felt heavier than before, as if mocking her. This was not a dream anymore. It was the beginning of a nightmare. And Nia realized nobody here knew her name. Nia's first week abroad stretched out like a slow punishment. She had come with her future folded neatly in her bag, the acceptance letter, the scholarship email, her passport stamped with a promise. Yet, in every office she visited, the same silence greeted her, the silence of a name that did not exist. Each day she woke before dawn, dressing carefully, choosing her clothes as if they might soften the skepticism in the faces she would meet. She walked across the frosted campus, her breath forming ghosts in the cold air. Students hurried past her, their laughter rising in clouds of steam, their lives already written into the university system. Their names carried weight here. Hers did not. The faculty secretary's bored voice repeated in her head long after she left the office.
There is no such name here.
It was not just a sentence. It was a verdict. She replayed it as she stood in line at the cafeteria, as she tried to navigate the buses, as she returned to her small dorm room each evening. The phrase followed her like a shadow, erasing her from every space she entered. In the international office, the clerk had offered no explanation, only a weary shrug that seemed to carry centuries of bureaucracy behind it. No record, she had said again, her lips barely moving. To the clerk, Nia was just another file that didn't exist. To Nia, it was her life. She began to notice how the students around her looked at her. Not cruelly, not directly, but with a vague curiosity, like a misplaced object in the wrong room. One or two asked where she was from, and when she said Kenya, their expressions froze into polite confusion, as if they couldn't quite place it on the map. A lanky volunteer student tried to comfort her, saying quietly,
"It happens sometimes, mistakes with Africans."
He had smiled kindly, but the word mistakes struck like a blade. She walked away before he finished speaking. Days blurred. She tried to reach someone in administration through email, but her messages bounced back with automated replies. She called numbers listed on the university's website, but was met with endless ringing, or a brisk voice speaking too quickly in a language she didn't understand. Her phone bill grew, while her hope shrank. At night, her family's messages came in waves. Her mother sent blessings in Kiswahili, her siblings asked for photos of lecture halls, her cousin teased her about finding a European boyfriend. The weight of their expectations pressed against her chest. They believed she was already seated in classrooms, already beginning the future they had all invested in. She wanted to type back, "I am not in any class. I am not even a student here." But she couldn't. To confess that truth was to betray them, to collapse the dream they had carried with her. So she lied with silence. Her dorm room became a cell of waiting. She taped her acceptance letter to the wall above her desk, as if the official seals might protect her, as if paper could fight against systems that had already dismissed her. Each time she looked at it, the words blurred. A letter from a university that claimed not to know her. Proof of something that everyone around her denied. The weather turned colder. She bought a cheap second-hand coat from a street market, its sleeves too short, its smell of dust clinging to her. She walked the city streets with her head lowered, trying to blend into a place that seemed determined to reject her. She saw groups of students gathered in cafes, flipping through textbooks, building friendships. She saw posters advertising lectures and film nights, events she could not attend because she had no student ID. She walked past the library doors, stopping only to stare at the scanners that granted entry to others but would never open for her. One afternoon, she returned to the faculty office, her acceptance letter trembling in her hands. She placed it on the desk, sliding it forward like evidence in a trial. The secretary glanced at it briefly before pushing it back toward her with 2 fingers.
"We cannot help you,"
she said flatly.
"Maybe you should call your embassy."
The embassy. Another word that carried weight, another reminder that she was a foreign body in this system. Nia left the office without answering. Outside, the cold air bit into her skin, her breath forming clouds that disappeared too quickly. At night, she dreamed of home. She saw her mother's hands shelling beans, her father's radio murmuring news, the smell of chapati on a hot pan. She woke with tears drying on her cheeks, the sterile dorm walls pressing in closer. The denial grew not only from the university, but from the city itself. Every bus driver ignored her when she asked for help. Every shopkeeper switched to rapid local language when she entered. She began to feel less like a student and more like a shadow drifting across foreign streets. Still, she clung to her letter. She folded and unfolded it until the creases were thin, until the ink smudged slightly at the edges. In the silence of her dorm, she whispered her own name aloud, over and over, as if saying it enough times could write her back into existence. Nia Okoth. Student. Kenya. Accepted. But the walls did not answer. And outside her door, the campus carried on, as if she had never been there at all. The cold had grown sharper, and with it, the silence around Nia. Days still blurred into one another, class, cafeteria, dorm, but something inside her was shifting. The cafeteria was still a battlefield. She still sat at the edge, her plate almost bare, stretching small bites into long moments. She still felt the weight of laughter around her, voices that curled into private circles she could never break. Yet on one particular day, she noticed someone else sitting alone, an unfamiliar face, another foreigner perhaps, though his skin was pale, his accent different. He sat hunched over his plate, shoulders folded in, chewing quietly, avoiding eye contact the same way she did. For a long time she stared at him from across the room. She recognized something in his posture, something that mirrored her own invisibility. It took 3 days before she sat across from him. She said nothing at first. Neither did he. But silence shared was different from silence endured alone. She felt it like a thin rope stretched between them, fragile but real. Later, she learned his name was David, a volunteer student from Eastern Europe. His clothes hung loose on his lanky frame, his hair always untidy, his voice soft and uncertain. He, too, struggled with the city. The loneliness. The feeling of being misplaced. They began to meet without planning it, choosing the same table, walking out of the cafeteria together. He listened more than he spoke, and she found herself talking, carefully at first, then more freely. Not about everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to ease the silence that had been pressing down on her chest. Nights were still difficult. She still lay awake, listening to the buzzing light, clutching her phone as though it might tether her to home. But now she had someone to message, someone who replied quickly, with clumsy words that nonetheless made her smile. She still dreamed of home, but the dreams began to soften. Instead of burning chapati and blurred faces, she saw her mother's hands, her father's steady silhouette, her siblings chasing one another in the yard. The dreams no longer accused her of absence, they reminded her of what she carried inside. One evening, David asked if she wanted to walk into the city together. She almost said no, fear and habit urged her to stay in, but something inside pushed her forward. The streets at night looked different when she was not alone. She pointed at the glowing bakeries, the bookshops, the coats in the store windows. He laughed at her wide-eyed amazement, though he confessed he had done the same when he first arrived. When they stopped at a bakery window, she pressed her face to the glass again. The pastries gleamed golden under the lights. But this time, when her reflection stared back at her, she did not look quite so small. She looked accompanied. They pulled a few coins together, barely enough, but enough for one pastry. They shared it on the walk back to campus, breaking it into uneven halves, sugar clinging to their fingertips, laughing when the wind nearly stole the crumbs. For the first time since she had arrived, the city did not feel like a predator. It felt like something she might, eventually, learn to live with. That night, Nia stood before her cracked dorm mirror, acceptance letter spread on the desk. She whispered her name once more. The reflection still looked tired, her eyes still ringed with exhaustion, but this time, she believed herself. The name did not sound like a question. Survival no longer meant shrinking herself. Survival meant reaching out, even just a little, to someone else who understood. And for the first time, she let herself imagine a future here, not just enduring, but belonging. The city, once a map of closed doors, began to unfold in small, unexpected ways. Nia no longer walked the long stretch from her dormitory to the lecture halls with her eyes fixed on the pavement. She had started to notice things: the crooked street light that flickered like a heartbeat at the bus stop, the bakery woman who always swept crumbs into a neat pile before locking the door, even the boy on a skateboard who nearly collided with her every Tuesday morning. These details stitched themselves into her days, softening the edges of the cold. It wasn't that everything suddenly became easy. Professors still spoke too fast, classmates still hesitated before pairing with her in group projects, and her accent still bent awkwardly around certain words. But something had shifted. It was as though the city had stopped trying to erase her and instead began to tolerate her presence, even welcome it in rare moments. David remained part of this slow transformation. He wasn't loud or particularly brave, but he was steady. Sometimes he walked beside her to class, his long strides awkwardly matching hers. Sometimes they studied in silence, their pens scratching across paper in a rhythm that felt like quiet companionship. He never asked too many questions, which she appreciated. Instead, he seemed content to simply exist in her orbit, as if he knew she needed that more than anything. Their friendship grew not in grand gestures but in fragments: half a sandwich shared when her lunch card failed, his coat draped over her shoulders when the heating broke in the library, his shy smile when she finally laughed out loud in a space that once silenced her. It was in those moments that Nia realized she was no longer just surviving. She was beginning, cautiously, to live. One evening, after a long day of lectures, David nudged her arm and suggested they take a different path home. She almost refused. Routine had become her shield, but something in his tone convinced her. They wandered through narrow side streets she had never dared to enter alone, streets that smelled of roasted chestnuts and hummed with music from tiny, hidden cafes. For the first time, she saw the city not as an opponent but as a place with layers, waiting to be discovered. In one cafe, lit only by candles and soft laughter, she sat at a wooden table and felt her guard loosen. The walls were covered with photographs of strangers who had once passed through, people who had laughed, studied, dreamed within those same walls. She wondered if she, too, would one day become part of such a story, her image a reminder to someone else that they had not been invisible. Nia found herself smiling more, even at her own reflection in the cracked dorm mirror. It still fractured her face into uneven shards, but she no longer recoiled. Instead, she touched the glass gently, as though greeting an old friend. The girl looking back at her was tired, yes, but she was also stronger, steadier. Letters from home continued to arrive, the handwriting messy and full of warmth. Her mother's words reminded her that strength was not about never bending, it was about bending without breaking. And in the silence of her room, Nia whispered back promises, not of escape, but of endurance, and maybe even of belonging. By the end of the semester, her professors had begun to learn her name. One of them even praised her essay for its perspective, a small acknowledgement that carried the weight of 1,000 unseen efforts. She walked home that day with her chest lifted, the city air cold but not cruel against her skin. That night, she lay in bed not with fear, but with a fragile sense of hope. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to believe that she could shape a future here, not as an outsider clinging to survival, but as a young woman carving a place for herself in a world that had once seemed unreachable. And though she did not know what awaited her beyond this fragile beginning, she knew one thing: she was no longer standing on the edge of loneliness. She was already stepping across. The city was still cold, still built of stone and steel, but to Nia, it no longer towered as an enemy. The streets she once hurried through with lowered eyes now unfolded as something else, a living map, layered with the memories she was quietly building. Each corner seemed marked not just by its faceless noise, but by small imprints of belonging. The chestnut stand near the square, the side street cafe where she first listened to music that carried warmth, the bench by the frozen river where she read her mother's letters, all became her landmarks, proof that she had endured. The semester's end crept in slowly. Snow thinned into slush, mornings arrived earlier, and the light that once felt sharp now touched the streets like a soft brush stroke. Nia noticed it fast in herself, how she no longer dressed as if going to battle each day, how she carried her books with a rhythm that matched the pace of the city, not a bit behind it. Where once she was the girl trying to blend into corridors, she had now become the girl who walked with steadiness, her head unbowed. Her professor's recognition had not been fleeting. The essay, carefully written in the silence of her small dorm, had sparked a conversation that grew into mentorship. He told her she had a voice, one that demanded to be written, not hidden. Each word of encouragement replaced the silence she once feared, the silence that made her wonder if she had made a mistake in coming here at all. Now she understood, she hadn't come just to study. She had come to grow, even if the growing meant breaking and healing fast. Friendships too, though fragile at the start, began to root themselves. David, lanky and awkward, had stopped being just the boy who showed her a shortcut. He became the one who asked if she'd eaten, who left books on her desk with notes in the margins, who walked her home after late study sessions. In his company, laughter returned in small doses, first shy and quick, later freer, filling gaps she hadn't realized were so deep. Others joined in too, classmates who once looked through her now waved her over, asked her questions, shared their own insecurities. She learned something surprising: everyone, in some way, carried loneliness. Hers had simply been louder. The letters from home arrived like lifelines, but now they felt different. They no longer spoke only to a girl aching to leave the cold behind. They spoke to a young woman who could write back, telling her mother not just of struggles, but of triumphs, the essay she had aced, the cafe that felt like hers, the way she had walked into a lecture hall and sat at the front row without trembling. Her family's pride was there in every word, a thread tying two worlds together instead of leaving her suspended between them. By spring, she found herself at the heart of moments she never thought she'd own. Presenting her research at a seminar, her voice steady and sure, she watched faces nodding, listening, not dismissing her. Walking through the market with friends, she stopped at stalls, pointing out foods that reminded her of home, laughing when they mispronounced the names. Writing late at night, she filled pages not just for assignments but for herself, stories she'd long buried rising to the surface like truths waiting to be claimed. And then, one evening, something shifted entirely. She returned from the library to her dorm window, the same window she had once stared out of with aching isolation. The city lights glimmered as they always had, indifferent and countless. But this time, when she saw her reflection in the glass, she didn't see a stranger, fractured and lost. She saw herself, whole, steady, unafraid. The lights did not blur her face, they surrounded it, as if she belonged among them. Loneliness had not vanished. It still lingered at the edges, waiting for quiet nights, but it no longer held power. What stood stronger was the truth she had built: she had crossed the hardest threshold. The city would never again be only a place of exile. It was now the setting of her own becoming. The final letter she wrote that season carried no tears, no desperation. Instead, it carried gratitude: I came here alone, but I am no longer only alone. I have found pieces of myself in the cold, and they fit. And as she sealed it, she smiled, not the fragile smile of survival, but the solid smile of someone who knew she had made it through.